Hello, everyone. Welcome. Good morning, good evening, whatever time it is for you. It's great to see you. Um, as you know, I'm Greg Finley, Director of LFA here at Terra.do, and I'm super excited today to have Dr. Heidi Roop join us. Heidi has spoken for Terra.do before. She's an incredible climate scientist. She's the director of the University of Minnesota Climate Adaptation Partnership and an assistant professor of climate science and extension specialist at the University of Minnesota. Her research and extension programs combine cutting-edge climate science and effective science communication to increase the use and integration of climate change information in decision-making at a range of scales, from city and state to national and international levels. Her climate science research takes her around the world, from Antarctica to California to the shores of Lake Superior. And her recent science communication efforts were focused on her book, The Climate Action Handbook, which hopefully we'll hear a little bit about, which outlines everyday ways we can contribute to collective and individual climate solutions. In addition to her appointments at the University of Minnesota, she also is an affiliate assistant professor in the School of Public Health at the University of Washington and serves as expert advisor to a range of organizations and agencies as they seek to build resilience to climate change. Dr. Roop, it's such an honor to have you with us. Thanks so much, and take it away.
Thanks for having me. That's always a mouthful. I'm Heidi. I care about climate. I try to do the best I can and show up in the ways I can. And that is the theme of today's conversation. So let me bear with me here while I get my slides going. We're having a bit of a tech challenge. Let's see if we can recreate what I did earlier this morning. Okay, I think we're there. So thank you so much for joining me today for this conversation. I'm hoping to go through this pretty quickly. Don't have too many slides, but really want to end in conversation and talk with you all about your climate solutions journey. I mean, obviously you're in it, you're exploring it, you're doing the work and the deep thinking, and hopefully what you hear a bit from me today either deepens your understanding or serves as motivation in that it's reiterating maybe some of the ways that you're thinking about it, the opportunity of climate change, and hopefully I'll have an opportunity to also learn from you and inform what I'm calling my climate solutions journey. So I have been thinking, and I work in the climate space, as you just heard, really understanding both our climate risks and then thinking deeply about how we manage those risks. And within that is a need to engage, inspire, and motivate all of us from our varied walks of life and our different contexts with our different strengths and passions to show up and be part of the solution to climate change and embrace the opportunity that is before us. So as part of that work, as you heard in my bio, I just sort of wanted to give you a grounding a little bit in who I am, at least in my professional role at the University of Minnesota. So I hold a dual appointment, which is within faculty. So it's sort of traditionally what you would think of as an academic, focused on the generation of climate knowledge and sort of earth science, basic science, research, discovery science, we sometimes call that, but really thinking about the application and the use of various forms of climate knowledge in decision making. So as part of that, I have been expanding and building upon this organization called the Climate Adaptation Partnership. It's been around since 2008, but in the last 3 years, we've been really pivoting to building a statewide program that taps into the other side of my appointment, which is within the extension system. And for those of you who aren't familiar, it's part of the Land Grant Institution. The federal government and state governments in every state in the US support and invest in extension, which is essentially intended to be a bridge between universities and the needs and practices and uses of science on the landscape. So a lot of people, when they think of extension, they think of agriculture. We do a whole lot more than agriculture, supporting, say, in determining best management practices for applying nitrogen fertilizer to a cornfield. That we do some of that, but there's everything from SNAP education to disaster response and recovery, family development, civic engagement, forestry, programs like the Mass Master Naturalist and the Master Gardener programs are part of Extension. And the work that we do is newer in the country, which is focusing explicitly on integrating and building a program dedicated to climate response and climate change within the extension system. So our work at the partnership, which sort of blends that research and the real world application and needs to build resilience to climate change, sort of focuses on predominantly the prepare side of the climate solutions coin. So when we think about climate solutions, right, we're thinking about how we prevent the problem from getting worse. So those are things like mitigation. That's the solar panels, transition to renewable energy. And then there's also the prepared side, the adaptation side. This is preparing for the changes that we know we've already set in motion in the climate system. So we know as a global society, we're going to be confronting with and needing to navigate through and withstand risks from climate change that we have committed. We've changed the system. I think sea level rise is a pretty salient one, in that we know from the scientific community that we have, there's only one direction of change for sea level rise for at least the next 1,500 years, and that is up. So there are big questions about how fast sea level will go up and how much it will rise. That's actually a domain in which I do some of my research in Antarctica. Or Antarctica kind of holds the clues to answers to those really critical climate questions. But nevertheless, we know we need to prepare. But what that looks like is still needs to be determined on a local basis. We need to make sure that as we're maybe preparing our coastal infrastructure and communities for sea level rise, we're not just pushing the problem down coast or up coast, but we're thinking about how we actually holistically respond across systems to manage the risks of climate change that we know we have to confront as communities across the country, no matter what sort of climate context you live in. We have to prepare both our human systems, our built environment, and of course, natural systems upon which we are reliant. So we really think about how we make and deepen investments in the preparation side while partnering to think about the mitigation side. And of course, the really rich area of overlap between those two in this Venn diagram, where things like soil health might be a really great resiliency investment because they improve water quality and reduce runoff during flood events, but they also bring benefits in that they can sequester carbon. So there are solutions that do both things. They are the sort of, they multi-solve for us. So our work is really embedded in the adaptation side of things, and we do that in a variety of ways. And part of why I mention this is because today, actually right now, in the next 20 minutes, the governor of the state of Minnesota is signing legislation for this session. Minnesota has made some incredible investments in climate solutions this session, and we are thrilled to be part of that, in that we've just received an ongoing appropriation from the state to hire a bunch of people with varied expertise to help us do this work across the landscape in the state of Minnesota. So we are working on building a exciting multidisciplinary cross-sectoral program of people wanting to work in community with community, helping them plan for, secure resources to actually do the work in responding to our risks, building the resilience piece. So we are really wanting on that sort of chain of action from planning to doing. We want to move folks to the doing part. We are, of course, in the United States in an exciting moment in time where there's an abundance of federal resource to help communities do the work, but a big capacity gap in terms of how we connect plans and priorities that are being set forth by communities and actually securing the resources so those plans can be put in motion and we can be enhancing both mitigation investments and building resilience across the landscape. So if you're interested to learn more or want to stay tuned, please do reach out. We're co-creating these positions with community. And so we're really hoping to be a value add and looking for a diverse set of expertise to help us do this work and fail forward and fail fast, because we've got to figure out how to make this work and set an example and document that so others can help and maybe build similar programs. So we do everything from generating future climate information. So one of the things we're doing right now is generating projections of future climate. But of course, as you all probably know, data are not enough to get people to do. So we also think about how we support the use of that information by providing dedicated training and capacity building helping people in all different career paths actually understand how to effectively use climate information in decision making, in sort of thinking about scenario planning and risk management. We engage the public through a range of different activities and programming. We do state and federal engagement, so really think about the policy landscape and how that helps accelerate the work that we want to do. We also are thinking deeply around how we actually measure and track success. So what does it mean to achieve resilience? How do we even know that what we're investing in, or if a priority is set forth, that the outcome is being achieved? This is somewhat easier in the mitigation space because it's in some ways more straightforward to understand if we've reduced emissions in a sector because we've transitioned to, say, renewable energy or a certain type of energy. It's a little more difficult to understand if investments that are intended to reduce risk or reduce exposure to risk are working, unless we experience, say, a massive flood event and we know that some of the green and gray infrastructure in place has reduced, say, a community, the damage associated with that event. So we're thinking about how we actually track and monitor this work in partnership with the state of Minnesota that has actually a whole climate plan in place. So this is all to say we do a lot of different things. I'm really thrilled and feel so fortunate to work with a team of people from all different backgrounds, from tribal natural resource management, I have students and staff that have expertise in climate and communication, program management, evaluation, basic science. So the folks who study atmospheric rivers and trees. And so we're working to build a broad bench of people from different walks of life to really think about how we build the system to respond to a systems-based challenge. So stay tuned on that, and excited to tell you more about that if you have questions or interest, and maybe some of you will come join me on the team and help us figure out how to do this work. So that brings you to some of the work that I do and sort of how I show up in this work. So this is not a talk around the climate impacts. You all are probably pretty fluent in that and what it means for you and the risks that we face. This is really about solutions. And so in my work, in my career work, I get to do both a lot of generating information about how the past climate, what the past climates look like, what we might expect in the future. And then I'm put in a position where I get to talk a lot about the problem. And so get to talk a lot about what the climate science community has observed and what we think is coming. This is a picture of me in East Antarctica. The ice, that hole I'm standing in is about 100,000 years old. The ice there, if we measured the age of that ice, it's about 100,000 years old. We were gathering that particular ice sample to understand and reconstruct what the mean ocean temperature was back that long ago. If you can believe it or not, we can do that, but get to spend time doing exciting and nerdy things like that, and also talking about climate change with a range of audiences, from sort of general publics to elected leaders. And inevitably at the end of every talk was this. I felt this way. I hate to admit that a professional photographer caught the feeling I normally have on the inside being manifested on the outside. This is me standing in front of 1,000 astronomers, including an astronaut. Pretty sure that's pretty embarrassing, but I put it up there because I'm human and I embarrass myself often, but also because this is how I felt at the end of every single talk or engagement I gave, when inevitably a hand or more would go up. And the question was, well, great, Heidi, you just painted this dire picture about climate change. Now, what do I do? What can I do? And so often I felt like I had an answer, but not an answer that welcomed people in, that acknowledged that many of us are standing and situated in different contexts, whether that's where we live or the resources we have available to us or the things that we care about, our values, and that we were, in essence, as a climate science community, because that's the one I can identify with in this context, we're sort of gatekeeping what kind of constituted a solution that mattered, what counted, what had an impact, right? So often it was about really important things that are super valuable in the context of greenhouse gas emissions and other things, like buying an electric vehicle, that not a whole bunch of people are well positioned to do in the absence of all sorts of other things like incentives or just major financial barriers, right, to entry. and we were talking about these things as if they were the only things that mattered. And I don't want to dismiss those things as being really important. And if you are in a situation where you can buy an electric vehicle, please do. We need you. We need that. It counts. Let's celebrate it. But we needed to find a way to celebrate more and different things and invite more people to show up. And so to do this, I had to sort of sit back and I was challenged, actually. I sat on a panel and we were having a sort of pseudo-academic debate about whether individual actions even matter and how we initiate collective change. And it's really about systems and corporations and the government. And I felt I could feel the audience sort of recoiling, right? Because I think that had been prompted by the question, like, well, what do I do? Like, how do I show up as part of this solution? And I remember sort of stepping back and saying, you know what? Principally, I think every action matters. And someone came up to me afterwards. Turns out they were an editor just about to retire. This is the last acquisition they made. And he approached me and said, you know, I appreciate what you said, but I think you need to put more meat on the bone. Like, what do you mean? Like, what's every action? Like, you need to do more. And I think there's a space to communicate that to an audience of people who don't have climate change as the thing that gets them out of bed in the morning. And you need to empower more of us to see how we can show up as individuals and influence the collective. So to do that, I had to think about who am I outside of my identity as a scientist. So here's a smattering of who I am outside of the work I just described to you. So you can see layered in there the pictures you saw of me doing my work, which of course is part of my identity. I'm one of those people who has a pretty terrible work-life relationship. I love what I do, so but it bleeds into too much of my life. I'm working on that. But I'm a mom. And this is a picture of my daughter, Abby. She's about to turn 3.5, which has principally changed some of my motivation for doing the work, but also how I prioritize what actions I'm going to engage in. I have a wonderful dog named Kuna, who's pretty old now, but she still loves to play ball and we love to be outside. There's a picture here of our friends, Ron and Harriet, who live in Alaska, who I'm nerding. That's a Ventifact from Greenland I'm holding there in the middle. I'm talking to them about wind and how it alters geology, right? I'm still a nerd at heart, even when I'm not doing my work. Love to talk about the planet and how it changes and my role as an observer and someone who has noticing as part of my job, but also part of my identity as who I am in the broader context of who I am. And principally, I think all these pictures show we really love being outside. I have a value in the natural world and situating myself in the natural world. And that is some of who I am and how I show up in the work. There are things on here that are harder to convey in photos. Like I love to clip coupons. I'm from the Midwest. I love to save me some money. And that's relevant when we get to talking about a climate solutions journey. So I love to be frugal. I love a good deal. I think that's sort of an iconically Midwestern thing, or at least we talk about it a lot. We always, whenever you talk about something you talk about how good of a deal you got on it first. Right? Oh, I like your blouse. Oh, did you know I got it for like 40% off? And whatever. We love to do that here in our my Midwestern culture. So I had to really sit and reflect on that challenge of like, what does every action mean and how do I show up? Because I can't put solar panels on my house. At the time I was a renter, not an owner. I had very little agency to do that. That wasn't authority I had. I couldn't control that, but there were lots of other things I can control. So enter the Climate Action Handbook, which ultimately reflects my journey of going from principally climate impacts to solutions and thinking about how do I show up with climate as part of my everyday decision, and how do I understand more deeply where I actually have agency as an individual to push the collective. So I'm sure you've heard, like we should talk about climate change. That is an action in this book. But again, I felt like I principally wasn't talking about it in a way that catalyzed people towards action, because I was really comfortable talking about the problem, but I didn't really have a portfolio of things that I can invite people in to see themselves as being part of the solution, right? If you have a kid, maybe it's thinking about like climate change being taught in school and engaging with your teachers. or your PTA. Maybe you are a fashionista and thinking about like, well, what is your clothing and how you show up in your identity and purchasing, like, how does that matter? So thinking about if I was trying to connect to people based on their values and who they were, trying to understand if there was a through line of climate action that I could engage in that conversation to move them towards a problem, but empower with a solution. So unsurprisingly, probably to all of you, I discovered that climate solutions surround us, and was able to learn a lot about what those things are. And the Climate Action Handbook is all the visuals you're seeing. That is the structure of the book. So when I thought about like, how do I do this? How do I invite people in? It wasn't through a long format chapter book on climate change. There are a lot of those. They're really amazing. I recommend you read them. I've put some of them in the book that I recommend. You've heard, I think, from some of the authors of those books. But I wanted to find people who don't want to have climate change as their bedside material. So, and I wanted to, even for people who have climate change information as bedside reading material, something more that could be, you don't have to read it in any particular order, and it's highly visual. So the structure of the book is 300 words and a visual or an infographic or a pull quote. So it's a welcome mat. There's a whole book that could be written about every single 100 of the actions, but not everybody wants an entire book. Some people just want to be entered into the conversation. They want to be inspired to think maybe in a different way. They want to be challenged. They want maybe a little bit of information. And maybe they're just looking to be like, oh, that's something I could do. I can build that into my day-to-day, or that's something I can't do now, but I'm on this journey. And that's something I'm going to work toward. Like a heat pump hot water heater, for example. That was one of the things on my journey. And I am proud to say that I just accomplished that last week. I now have a really sexy water heater in my basement. Very excited about my heat pump hot water heater. But that was something that I was out of reach for a long time and is now in reach, right? So now I'm on this pathway. And so, of course, there are solutions from everything from our energy use and transportation to our consumer choices, to what we eat, to how we engage and show up in community, and the information we consume, and critically, how thoughtful we are about the information we consume and also the information we share. So to lean back into this climate solutions coin that I talked about earlier in the context of our professional work at the Adaptation Partnership, when I think about climate solutions as individuals and how we contribute to the collective, we can think in that same way. So what do we do to prevent the problem from getting worse? These are things we talk about a lot, right? Solar panels, thinking about how we commute, the mode of transportation we use, how much food waste we produce in our households, because of course that produces methane when it's not composted. We can think about the multitude of ways that we can prevent the problem from getting worse, and also push systems to do more transition to renewable energy, so on and so forth. We also can build a portfolio of work that helps prevent or helps prepare for the changes we know we've set in motion. This is a space where I think we don't talk about it enough. I don't think we necessarily talk about these actions as climate actions, but they are a critical way that I think we can engage more people in the conversation, because preparedness, managing for risks as an individual or in a community can be a door that opens wider than one that says, we maybe need to make this really deep investment in renewable energy. So I think it can be a way to welcome more people into the conversation, thinking about what ways we can prepare. So one of the things that I ask people a lot, and if I can, Greg, I might ask you to do the tally because I can't quite see everyone on the screen. But how many people have a preparedness kit at home, a stay bin or a go bag? You can maybe raise your hand. 1, 2, 3. Y'all are above average. Okay, so here's a climate action. If you are in a position for, okay, thank you. And you may think, well, this isn't really, oh, Heidi, that's not a climate action. Let me tell you why. Building your own individual resilience and preparedness at home for a disaster, climate or otherwise. Maybe some of you are on the West Coast and you have an earthquake kit, which is also earthquakes and climate change, not connected, but preparedness nonetheless, right? Making sure you have documentation in order, that you have, Rexers recommend N95 masks, a source of light, maybe power if you can afford to have a backup battery storage. Increasingly, there's lots of little portable backup batteries that you can use to power critical devices in the event of a disaster. Then you can also think about your go bag if you have to evacuate. Folks who live in hurricane prone regions are probably more have this type of thing in hand. But if you need to leave your home, making sure you have a plan for what that looks like and for your family is really important. And the reason this is a climate action is because many of us are likely to experience more extreme weather events, unfortunately. In many cases, we already are in many parts of the world. And by preparing yourself, you can actually are more likely to be able to show up for your community. And you're also less likely to draw on what is an under-resourced, at least in the United States, there is not enough emergency response to go around. And so for those of us that can prepare and have these resources in hand, it allows our emergency managers and others in the moment of crisis to prioritize where they invest their time and finite resources in saving those who are maybe at most risk by responding to those with greatest need. And if we can lessen our reliance on that system and be able to show up for our neighborhood as a collective, that it builds our resilience as individuals, which might motivate you, right, to protect your own self and family. That's an okay motivation to have. Right. But we can also then, if we are prepared, we can also we're more likely to be able to show up for the community and those around us, for our neighbors. And increasingly, I'm seeing people do this in their neighborhood. There are more and more resources available, like water storage and water filtration systems that are great on a neighborhood scale. And so I've heard stories of neighborhoods pooling resources. One family raises their hand and said, you know what, we want to be the people who are able to provide water for the neighborhood. Will everybody chip in $20 and we're going to buy this big water filtration system. We'll connect it to our sink. In the moment of crisis, we'll put a table out. We're prepared, but everybody knows that they can come and fill up a water jug in the moment in case that we need it. And so they're coming together as a collective. They're talking about their needs. They're helping protect one another. And we know very clearly that communities that have that social cohesion are better able to withstand and recover from impacts like a weather or climate related disaster. So it may not seem connected, but these small, seemingly small actions can have a meaningful impact, not just for you, but as a community and as a collective scale. We can champion climate leadership and support those who are doing good work. And we can think about the way that we broadly prepare systems in our community, using our yards as climate solutions, using our boulevards and green spaces as climate solutions, using our parks and green spaces, working at the collective level to make sure our parks boards are thinking about how to ensure they're preserving that green space for the future by planting trees and plants that are climate adapted, while also creating critical habitat and preventing, say, in a flood risk area like the one I live in, making sure we have ample green space to help absorb some of that flood water when it comes and those heavy rain events that are already occurring in the geography that I call home. So this is all to say that we need to be thinking not about a carbon footprint. We can do that. We should use carbon footprint calculators. Those are also propagated by the fossil fuel industry to shift the burden of blame to individuals and not the systems and corporations that are making the problem worse in the first place. But we can think about our climate action footprint. What is the sum whole of all the various parts and pieces that you do that help prevent the problem from getting worse, prepare you and your family and your community for those changes we set in motion? And how does that action footprint catalyze you towards continued and sustained engagement in this work and in this space, acknowledging that we are in this for the long haul? So inevitably, people say, well, Heidi, but what's the one thing from the book? Tell me the one action we should all do. Well, that's not the point. The point is not that one thing for me might be different than the one thing for you. And hopefully it's not one. Hopefully it's a multitude of things. And it's maybe things you do today, and there's things you're going to do tomorrow and the next day and the next day and the next day. Or maybe even not day after day. Maybe it's something that you're going to do this year. And there's something else that you might do next year, and you might build towards and iterate. So in not stealing my own, going against my own sort of view on how we need to be thinking about climate solutions, I'm going to give you the 5 things that I think we need to do in order to catalyze action and develop that climate action footprint as individuals interested in also moving systems towards change. So I heard Greg say this already, so I think I'm going to reiterate some of the values that are already that you've already shared in this space with one another, which is we need to center our action in our strengths and passions. If it feels hard, if it feels like it doesn't motivate us, like it's not enough, if it's not the thing that leans into what you are good at, we're not going to do it. And we need everybody using the things they care about, the passions they have, the expertise they have to bring to bear on the solutions. There's so many things we can be doing to embrace the opportunity of the challenge that is in front of us. And if we don't center that in our strengths and passions, we're not going to get there. So that's one. We have to use our energy wisely. And I'm going to tell you about 2 of those things in a second here. I mean that in multiple ways. We have to commit to communicate, which I suspect you've already heard. And in doing so, we have to move people towards action. We, of course, need to look to the ballot box and beyond. And I'm going to contextualize this in some of the US political context. And of course, there are other political contexts globally that I think this still stands true, but the data I'm going to show you are really about the US. And then we need to consider as we develop this climate action footprint and as we go on this journey, this climate solutions journey, we need to be thinking about the individual, the community, and of course, the collective. So we know climate change is an all hands on deck situation, and what we shape and create together needs to include a rich diversity of perspectives and approaches, right? If we continue to exclude people from the conversation, to gatekeep what counts as a climate solution, to say this matters and this doesn't, this has an impact, that doesn't have enough impact, we're not going to be able to multi-solve and really embrace the opportunity of systems-based change that climate change requires to develop systems that are more equitable and just and diverse and beautiful and help us create that future that we all want to create, right? So people often say to me that, Heidi, but I'm not an expert. Well, I'm here to tell you you are, because you are an expert in the future you want to create. Those are expertise you hold that are important. And so if we center thinking about what is the future I want to create, I'm an expert in defining what that future looks like for me and for my family and my community and the things I care about. So we need to not exclude people and require expertise to be part of this. So this is a quote from my former boss, actually, who is a mentor and colleague. And as she was going into retirement, she said, no matter what you do or what your skills are, you can have a role in shaping the future and thinking about how we prepare for and reduce climate change. So I want to invite you to really lean into that. And maybe if you don't know what your strengths or passions are, talk to someone who cares about you, because they'll be able to tell you what your strengths and passions are, and start there and lean into whatever those are, because we need them. So 2, we have to use our energy wisely. These are things you've probably heard about and have already talked about as you've been going through this program. So where you can, opt into energy efficiency and renewable energy. And these are things you're like, well, that's not surprising, but so we have to use our energy wisely, right? Whatever that looks like for us in our context. This can be making your home more energy efficient through sealing air leaks and using insulation, changing light bulbs. We can get double pane windows, think about our heat loss and cooling loss through our homes. Think about how you power your home and appliances, things like that, right? Like my fancy new heat pump hot water heater that I think is just beautiful. That's one way that I'm opting into more energy efficiency. And also then in some of the other ways that in my work, I'm working towards pushing our system towards more renewable energy. So we have to use our energy wisely. We also have to use other forms of energy wisely. Does anyone have an idea of what these dots represent in the context of energy? Any ideas if someone wants to unmute? Yeah.
I'm guessing sun, wind, water.
Hey, good guess. Any other guesses? No takers. Are there some in the chat, Greg? I can't quite see the chat in my view.
We've got sun, geothermal, and wind in the chat.
Okay. All right. Well, so this has to do with, again, I'm going to contextualize this in statistics in the US. So the yellow are the percent of adult Americans who are alarmed, cautious, and concerned about climate change. The blue dot are the increasingly small minority of individuals who deny or dismiss that climate change is happening. But more often than not, I hear people wanting to focus or focusing their energy on that much smaller blue dot and looking away from the alarmingly large yellow dot of people who want to have a conversation that is safe, that is welcoming, that is with someone within their community that they know, right? They don't want to hear it from me, the climate scientist. Clearly, that hasn't worked. We've been trying to shout from the rooftops, albeit ineffectively, for decades. They're not looking for me. They're looking for you. And that ever small blue dot are often not really interested in a good faith conversation. And we shouldn't be focusing our energy on trying to change someone's mind or belief system, but instead welcoming them in and listening and honoring and not judging questions that they may have or information they might not fully understand, because we also live in a dis and misinformation landscape where I can understand why people are confused. Even people who are alarmed and concerned, right? There is greenwashing left and right? There's an imperative and unfortunately a burden of responsibility on many of us as individuals who have the ability to do research and do that learning to understand what's what, and is someone really walking the walk or not, right? Companies, all these things. So we need to be focusing our energy towards the people who want to figure out how to get engaged, want to understand if they should really be concerned, and help them connect the dots between this problem that they hear about and the life that they live and the things that they care about, right? There are connections to climate change everywhere. The food we eat, the water in our taps and toilets, right? There is something you care about is at risk from climate change. And most people just want to have a safe place to have a conversation and want to know from someone that's you, not me. And so we have to use that energy wisely. And I think we are misplacing a lot of well-intentioned energy in places where it's not best used. So if we want to stay and sustain in this work, we also need to find places where we can make progress and feel like we are engaging in good faith and building community. And I encourage you to look towards the sun rather than the dark sky, because there's more bright sun than there is dark sky when it comes to people who are really wanting to just find a place and space in this work. So with that, of course, you've probably already heard we need to commit to communicate. And I think some of that involves us being effective communicators and thinking about what it is we care about, right? Leaning back into those strengths and passions, because those are the things that motivate you, right? Facts and figures don't change hearts and minds, but people do. And that's you. You have the ability to do that by showing up authentically in a conversation around climate. And yes, talking about the multitude of things that people can do. And the book for me was the tool to do that education, to figure out how I might weave some of that into my own conversations about climate, because I wasn't being effective. So we know a majority of people think that this problem is happening. Fewer people think it's happening to them. I live in the Midwest. I know there's some other folks from Minnesota on this call, and I know the East Coast experience this as well, right? Wildfire smoke in Alberta. Most of us in the Midwest think wildfire is a West Coast phenomenon. That's a problem someone else is dealing with. Turns out we all in the state of Minnesota for an entire day had air quality that was unhealthy for all humans, right? And that, of course, if you live in California, you're like, well, one day, talk about all summer, Heidi. But we are deeply connected to climate, but most people are not connecting the dots between what they are living and the air they are breathing and this issue. We know that people are not hearing about it in the news, and that very few of us talk about this issue on a regular basis, especially with those who trust us most, like families and friends. So I encourage you to have a climate conversation, not a doom and gloom one, but maybe about that future that you want to create. And of course, we need to think about systems-based change. And one way we do this is by looking to the ballot box. I think this is one of the most things that has struck me the most, and I return to time and again as I think about my journey and where I have influence, when I feel like the things that I'm doing at home are not enough. And I hear things like only 49% of Americans think that climate change is caused by greenhouse gas emissions, right? By us, things like that get me down. And I think this is too incremental, not fast enough. I come back to this and I remind myself that, again, if we think about that yellow dot and the blue dot, in the US, there are over 500,000 elected leaders, but we tend to focus on the 0.1% of elected leaders at the federal level, rather than the 96.3% of elected leaders who work at the local level. These are people who live in our neighborhoods, who might have kids that go to school with our kids. These are people who, and I said I live in Minnesota. We were dealing with a pothole problem because we had a very a climate change type winter where we had lots of freeze and thaw cycles, lots of snow, and then rain in January. And so our roads are awful. So it turns out elected leaders were also talking about transportation funding and infrastructure funding because they were driving over those same potholes. So I use the potholes as an opportunity to talk about climate change. They really hate me when I come knocking because I can connect a pothole to climate change. But we have so many local leaders who need to hear from us. So we can vote in every election and vote down the ballot. That matters too, because those are points of light and influence for people who are making decisions about our water infrastructure, our green spaces, our roads, all the things that we take for granted every day. There is likely someone who we are putting in a position of power to make that decision on our behalves. But unfortunately, even when we do vote and we do vote down ballot, most of us do not engage our elected leaders. So 70% of registered voters in the United States support transitioning the US economy from fossil fuels to clean energy by mid-century. We've seen strides there. Yet 90% of registered voters have not contacted their elected officials to act on climate change. So again, there's a big disconnect between acknowledging there's a problem, wanting to see a solution implemented, and connecting the dots to the people who have the authority and the responsibility to represent their constituents to make that change. So we need to not only vote, but we need to civically engage. And that can be, and I've learned this, I'm sort of embarrassed to have learned this, that can be not so difficult. It can be as simple as an email. Granted, you have to know what you support and you kind of have to understand the landscape of what's going on. But even if you want to see your elected leader do more climate work, it can simply be an email. Email your elected leader because they don't really care about constituents they don't represent. But your support, or your saying, I don't support a specific piece of legislation, or just asking for climate action more broadly, that gets noted. Someone notes that in a system. If you're specifically writing about a specific piece of legislation, that will get noted not only by your elected leader, even if you don't hear back, but it will go into a system when they consider what type of support they have for or against particular bills. So it's important, and as simple as an email, to say, please, I support this work, or I want to see the state, insert the thing you care about, the place you care about, do more in the context of renewable energy or climate preparedness. Or if you know a specific bill, put that in there. Doesn't have to be a chapter book, short, couple sentences. Someone will read it, someone will note it, and it makes a difference. So as we do this work, and I'm about to transition to our conversation here, we have to consider the individual, the community, and the collective. And I've tried to weave in examples of that through my remarks today, but I invite you, as you think about your climate solutions journey and your climate action footprint, to think about the places and spaces where you can act as an individual, where that scales up to having impact on your community, or ways you can show up and help your community plan for climate change, connect resources to put that plan into reality. And we also have to think about those systems-based changes. And we have to also consider that as we do things across systems, that we are thinking about the systems that we also impact both upstream and downstream. So there are things, there's a thing called maladaptation. That could be making an investment that actually either worsens our resilience or pushes the problem downstream. And there are a lot of examples of that. There's a lot of conversation around things like trees and carbon offsets, and whether that is going to worsen hunger and food scarcity around the world, because where we put trees and who has to keep trees on the landscape, there are a lot of inequities that can be baked into those decisions if we're not thoughtful and thinking about the impact across systems and across people and across geographies. So we need to be thoughtful as we also influence collective-based change. So as a wrap up here, I want to acknowledge that this work can be hard. And so what we do, and I say this as much for you as I do as a reminder for me, because I struggle, and I can lean into my science, Heidi, and sort of I've been trained to remove the Heidi that has feelings and emotions. We're really, really terrible at training that in the science, in the Western science approaches. But I invite you to be sure that you're being mindful of your head and your heart as you do this work. And if you can't show up in a given day, that's okay, because we need you tomorrow or next month or next year when you can re-engage, because this work is difficult and emotional, and it requires us to be thoughtful and mindful, because if we are in this for the long haul, we have to find ways to sustain our work. And sometimes that might be finding community or just taking a step back and really tending to you as a person so that you can continue to do this work in a way that feels right. And again, leans into those strengths and passions to sustain you for the long haul. So with that, the last action in the book is celebrating success and expressing gratitude. And you may think this doesn't count, Heidi. That's a cheat. I will say that clinical psychology shows that people who receive gratitude are more likely to perform the act for which they have received gratitude again. They're going to repeat that acknowledged behavior. So I think as we do this work and maybe we feel it's too small or incremental, or that doesn't matter enough, or we need to do more. Yes, we need to do more. We need to do more of everything. But one way we do that is by honoring and celebrating the work that is already being done, and not just focusing on all that we have to do, but celebrating where we already are. And I think one point of celebration that I'll throw out there before I invite you to share your gratitude and success, maybe that's your success, maybe that's success you want to honor outside of this call. I want to honor that we have made big strides in our conversation around climate. And I will say that while climate change is still a very political topic in the United States, one that makes me feel that is one place where I tend to find that I lose hope. I want to celebrate that I am hearing the conversation shift on both sides of the aisle, not from debating about whether we have a problem, but how we solve that problem. So we're moving from there isn't an issue to we all acknowledge we have a problem, and now we're going to debate what we do about it. And I would much rather be there than still talking about whether climate change is a belief. Let's have those hard conversations around how we solve the problem, who pays for it, who benefits, how hard is this, right? I want to be there. I want to be having that conversation. I want to be engaged in that dialogue. And I want to celebrate that we are moving towards that more quickly than I think our national discourse leads us to believe. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I would like to invite anyone who is willing to share some note of gratitude or celebration, or if you want to thank yourself just for showing up today. I just want to invite anyone who would like to say gratitude to someone on this call or to someone in your universe. Speaking out loud might remind you to maybe send a text or a call later after this engagement. So Greg, I see your hand up. Do you have some success you'd like to celebrate or gratitude you'd like to extend?
I have gratitude I'd like to extend first to you, Heidi. Thank you for joining us so much and sharing with us today. Really awesome. And then to all the fellows on this call, I have incredible gratitude to all of you for being in this program, for being here today, for committing to do something about climate change. So thank you so very, very, very much.
Wonderful. Thank you, Greg. Anybody else? You can go ahead and unmute if you want. Yes, Margaret.
I actually, while you were saying that, sent an email to a member of our school board. We are very opposite in pretty much everything politically, but I had suggested I emailed her and then suggested at a school board meeting, that they look into getting solar panels on schools, and she'd set up a meeting with our school district's head of facilities and another school district who already has solar panels to see about the feasibility. So she's working on moving it forward. So I just sent an email quickly thanking her for doing that.
Oh, awesome. Thank you so much. That's wonderful. Anybody else? Carol, I see you unmuted.
Yeah. I want to thank Tara for creating this incredible program. I think it's super extraordinary, and it's been amazing to meet all the people, the fellow students and the teachers. So it's just really, I feel a lot of gratitude, and I'm a big booster.
Awesome. Anyone else? Some words of gratitude, or just a success that you've seen that you want to celebrate?
I'll go. I want to say thanks to all. I have been systematically interviewing different founders of small companies that are working in this space, just to really learn where I'm going to land. And the Teradoo community is amazing. Like, people will take your call and spend 10 minutes and tell you, where the next best thing that you should research is. And your book is phenomenal. So thank you. I think what's really interesting is that difference between, like, there's the systems problem and then there's the community. And that spread is vast. And you were able to articulate that so well. Your slides are amazing. So thank you for coming here today. It's so impressive.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. Just trying to look in the, anybody else? We still have time. We've got I can answer questions too, but I love hearing what you all are doing and want to celebrate as well. Can be a good way to move through the day. Yeah.
I'm here in Minnesota, and we just had a ton of legislation go through, but there's going to be a lot of climate funding, and I bet that's exciting for both of us.
I'm so excited. It's such a big win. I know, obviously we're on this call right now, but the governor was signing it this morning, the whole budget. So yes, so excited. We had a very big transformative climate package move through the legislature this year. So all sorts of things. So yes, very excited. All many more things than I can even keep tabs on. So yes. Anyone else?
Sure, I'll go.
Yeah, Sarah.
So thanks to Teradoo and the community, I ended up going to the Climate SF Week and meeting a woman, a Berkeley teacher, who's doing pocket forests. She got one of the grant. And actually at the right now, there's a California bill, AB 57, that's supporting pocket forests. And so reaching back out to her, because she really was excited about how could myself or the broader community kind of support the spreading of what she's been doing. She's been doing it with elementary school kids, this idea of having them plant pocket forests. So yeah, just kind of how the different things connect.
Oh, that's cool. That's so awesome. I love that. And I love the visual that creates too. My daughter would love a pocket forest. Now I learned something. I'm going to go think about what that might look like in my community. So thank you for the inspiration. Anyone else? Yeah, Mary Beth.
I think I see a few people from my lab here. I just wanted to say thank you to all the teachers at Terra, especially our Katie. She's been really well thought out lessons and gives us a lot of time when she has a very busy schedule. So yeah.
Yay. Yay, Katie. Awesome. Well, I invite you to sprinkle in any gratitude that you want to in the remaining, but I'm also open if anyone has any questions or just reflections that you'd like to share to spaces ours collectively. So I don't know if anyone has any thoughts or burning things before in our last few minutes together.
Hey, Heidi, this is Mike. A question I have for you is seeing the beautifully designed visualizations in your book and keeping the content quite simple and easy to digest. I'm curious what groups or communities you're seeing have the most traction with it. Is it younger folks that are inspired? Is it folks that are pivoting careers? Is it older folks like what Bill McKibben's working on? Or all of the above, but just curious if any of the design thinking was informed by the audience it was going to meet.
Yeah, great question. I'd say in terms of like where it's landing, I'd say two things. One, I wish I were good at social media. So if anyone knows anyone who could help me, like I desperately need help. Because that is part of the strength, right? That it's that's an untapped strength, I think, of the book, which is that it's very visual, and that was on purpose, right? I acknowledged that if I wanted to do this, I needed to do it in collaboration with someone with a very different skill set from mine. And so I'm just so deeply honored to have worked with the illustrator Joshua Powell, who created the graphics for the book. And we had like this amazing workflow where I found a bunch of nerdy information, and then he just like did magic. I wish I had these skills, and I do not. And so that collaboration was so fun, really challenging, but also really fun. I'd say, I'm sure Josh is like, I never want to talk to her again. So it was a lot of back and forth and nitty gritty to make sure it was right. But that was really part of it. And I think that I've learned that I think that style resonates with a lot of people. I think that, and I maybe need to do more storytelling and like figuring out how to amplify that this resource is available. So if there are places and spaces where you want to use those graphics, please reach out. Like the goal is to share, to spread, to figure out how we get the information out there. Very happy to talk about what that might look like. If you have a need for anything you see or saw today that you'd like to include in something, like it's meant to be shared. I think a lot of people are picking up, even I'll just give you an anecdote from my dad, right? You would think that he would be tired of hearing me talk about climate and would know all the things. And it was so funny because he texted me and then he thought he didn't text me. So he called me, but thought he was texting me. I don't even know how you confuse those two things, but nevertheless, my dad, he called and he's like, oh, I thought I was texting you. I was like, they're very different buttons, Dad. Like they're actually like different functions on your phone. But nevertheless, I'm here to tell me what are you calling about? He's like, I just want to tell you, I read the action in your book around like road rage and driving the speed limit. And he's like, so I decided I'd like put it as the test. And he's like, I drove the speed limit all the way from your house back to Wisconsin. And he was so proud that on the way home, his average miles per gallon was, I think he said 30. He drives a Subaru Outback. So like we're working towards changing that. But he was so proud because on the way over here, before he had read that action, it was like 26 or something. So he was like, you know what? I saved like 30 cents a gallon just by driving the speed limit. So now he's like all clever. He's like, I'm going to get bumper stickers made that say, I'm driving the speed limit. Are you? And I was like, Dad, I think you need to work on your tagline. But, I think it's resonated with the sort of 70-plus-year-old crowd, as well as some of the students and others that I work with, in part that it's really meant to be, anyone can look at, you don't have to read it in any order. You can flip through and like find a color that feels inspiring to you in that day. That was all very intentional in the design process, was like, we just need to find a way to connect more people in whatever way they can connect. So, that's sort of where I am. I don't know if that was a good answer, but that's the space that I'm kind of occupying there. So I'm being surprised by some of the things that like my dad's excited about driving the speed limit now. I don't know. That's his thing. I'm like, okay, what else can you do, Dad? But he's very excited about making sure everybody drives the speed limit. So for climate change.
Thank you, Heidi. Yeah. I work in and around social media and content, and have some ideas around experiential that might be a fun collaboration. I'll definitely reach out and we'd be happy.
Yeah. Please do. I'll pop my email in the chat. Yeah, anyone, please feel free to reach out.
Awesome, everyone. We are at time. I don't want to take up too much of Heidi's time or your own. Thank you all for joining us so very, very much. As Michelle says, this is a great lead into doing our action plans. I hope that is the case. This helps you with assignment 5, your personal action plans. And again, thanks so much. And you can put some more questions in the chat, or in Slack if you want, and I can share them with Heidi. So thanks, everybody. And again,
thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Heidi.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.